Kathleen from Fashion Revolution USA here today with us to share some information and to cover some topics that directly affect our industry, not only in terms of just people, but also in terms of the environment, the creative process, and the business side of fashion. And so with that, our conversation with Kathleen and Shannon, we'll get started here and have them talk about the distribution of our values and wealth that's created within our fashion industry and talk about the different sectors that are involved. So with that, let me introduce Shannon and Kathleen and turn it over to you. Welcome.
Thank you, Jim. Thanks so much for having us. I'm going to get started and hi, everybody. My name is Kathleen Grievers and I'm part of Fashion Revolution. And first and foremost, as you said, it is a historical day. And we want to give some understanding that, and really this is a quote from a recent post from our whole communications and the whole team at Fashion Revolution, that we value the ethical business and regenerative practices, responsible production, and last but not certainly least, supporting all voices across the supply chain. And to have a leader with openness to many of these same values presents an exciting opportunity for our changing country and our world. And approaching this from a way that we understand there are still challenges ahead, and we must continue to make our voices heard if we are to systematically address the simultaneous crisis we face with climate change, social justice, and much more. But we're ready to tackle the future alongside you and to create a thriving world amidst it all. So we just want to really capture this moment, and it is an historical day, and we're excited to present at Ethical Fashion Festival today and day 3. So you are now a part of Fashion Revolution 101. No prerequisite required, and you're here with Shannon and I. So we're going to go ahead and get started here. And just to know, we're going to give a little bit of history, and some of it is kind of difficult to digest, but we're doing it because it is the difficult work to do. So first, we want to start with just saying, here's where Fashion Revolution came to be. On April 24th, 2013, 1,134 people were killed and over 2,500 were injured when an enormous clothing manufacturer within this Rana Plaza complex collapsed in Dhaka, Bangladesh. And this is what churned our founders, Ursula and Carrie, to start Fashion Revolution, because there were so many workers' rights that were fully disregarded. And our mission came from this. And our mission is, we believe in fashion, an industry which values people, the environment, creativity, and profits in equal measure. And it's everybody's responsibility to ensure this happens. So we go through a full transparency in support of fair trade, well-being, living wages, empowerment, gender equality, business accountability, sustainable livelihoods, good working conditions, and environmental sustainability. And this to create a fairer, safer, cleaner fashion industry. So again, my name is Kathleen Grievers, and I am the Director of Education at Fashion Revolution USA. I'm also the Regional Coordinator for the New England area.
And again, I'm Shannon Welch, Director of Strategic Partnerships, and I'm also the Regional Coordinator for the Tri-State area of New York, New Jersey, and Connecticut. So thank you. So we're kind of going to start on talking about the history lessons here a little bit, and understanding that, you know, since we're a little kid, you know, I think we were taught that, you know, we need to learn from history so it doesn't repeat itself. Unfortunately, history does repeat itself. And there are quite a few instances of this happening. If you went to designer fashion school, you always learn about the Triangle Shirtwaist Factory fire, which occurred in the Lower East Side of New York City in 1911, which killed 146 people. And at that time, that was one of the worst industrial accidents to ever happen in the apparel industry. But as we can see in the next slide, as you know, Kathleen introduced everyone to prior about the Rana Plaza factory collapse, this happened over 100 years later in a different country, but still an example of how things aren't changing, they're changing locations. And you know, ever since like the 1990s, 1980s or so, a lot of manufacturing has been pushed overseas to developing nations, and specifically Bangladesh, which accounts about 80% of their entire GDP, or their exports are apparel, and there obviously wages are much lower. But as we're focusing on Bangladesh, I definitely wanted to kind of home in on some specific statistics, and especially this one here on the left, talking about how in Bangladesh, 40% of garment workers said that they have seen fire break out within their place of work. And that's not something most people in most jobs can ever state, and it's terrible. Again, here in Dhaka, the biggest city in Bangladesh where most of the manufacturing happens, I think 60% of workers have reported that they are regularly not paid for overtime. So when we talk about minimum wages, and as Kathleen brought up before about living wages, those things are very, very different. You know, a living wage is, so you don't need anything else off of that. You don't need to work a second job. You're able to pay for your rent, pay for your food, your education, and still be able to save and live. Whereas minimum wages in most countries, and even in the US, I wouldn't even call a living wage. The federal minimum wage here is $7.25, which a few states, a handful of states, including New Jersey, Massachusetts, and New York, have a $15 minimum wage now, which I think, I don't have the exact facts on that, but I would say that's closer to a living wage. But if you live in New York City, like $15 an hour, I wouldn't call a living wage as much. Kathleen, if you want to go to the next slide. Oh, sorry, we can jump into a little trivia. We're breaking up our presentation a little bit to engage with everyone. Kathleen, do you want to go through the form?
Yeah, so Shannon, I'll throw this question at you. So
Okay.
since the Accord on Fire and Building Safety in Bangladesh, so the Accord was the group that tried to consolidate and create a map for safety in Bangladesh. So since that was established in the wake of the deadly Rana Plaza factory collapse in 2013, factory inspectors have identified over 100,000 fire, building, and electrical hazards, most of which have been rectified, and over 2 million garment workers have participated in safety training. So here's a question. In 2018, what restrictions did Bangladesh government try to impose on its future operation? A, all of the decisions would have to be approved by a government committee. B, its inspectors would not be allowed to identify new safety violations, sneaky. C, it could no longer take action against factory owners they could not take action against factory owners or fire workers for raising safety complaints. Or D, all of the above. Do I do the Jeopardy tune? Sorry, go ahead.
No.
So,
Okay.
so while the audience and other participants are thinking about the questions that you just posed, you know, what you're talking about is the intersection between the workers, the factory management and ownership, the brands that contract those factories. So if we want to take all of those pieces together in terms of, you know, the designers that came up with the concept of the garment, the suppliers that are providing the materials, the brands that are involved, the manufacturers, and then ultimately the workers, if we blend all of that together from those standpoints, you know, the question here posed, I guess, takes the perspective of who is this really trying to protect? Maybe Shannon, you and Kathleen, if you want to talk about that in terms of these are government regulations, who's the beneficiary if we look at that? Because we named a bunch of different parties. There's clearly one group that is being shorted on this. Please.
So I'll jump in with that. And the not so funny truth is a lot of government officials are factory owners, because the apparel industry is so ingrained into everything that happens in Bangladesh, that the government is setting some of these laws in order to protect itself, which are also the factory owners, a bit. So, and I think you were leaning to there, Jim, like it doesn't seem to cover a lot of the workers. I mean, and Kathleen, feel free to jump in. I think one thing about the accord is it is binding. So the brands that signed on to it, and they've done a lot of really good. And I don't think they've handed it back over, as I know that it was the working group that was kind of overseeing everything for 5 years, and then they were trying to turn it back over to the government to let them self-manage it. But I'm not 100% sure on if that has happened or not. I can definitely point you to an expert who knows all about this.
Yeah, and I think that you're absolutely on the right track, because it really impacts the garment worker, all essence after everything's said and done. But there's so much legislation that still needs to go. And I think this question kind of highlights that in any aspect, there's no legislation for it that we've gone through. And even with COVID, I think it's even made things go backwards, from the news that I see posted about how a lot of brands are not even paying for all of the work that's already been completed on these garments. So I think right now we're pedaling backwards, and hopefully maybe when we start going forwards again, we can say that that this is not an issue anymore. But Shannon, I'll let you answer it, because
well, we had 2 answers and they are right. It is D, all of the above, all of the above. Yeah, and I think we can get into this more, but talking about how a lot of these brands are not manufacturers. They do not actually make clothing. They contract out to have things made. So then there's not as much responsibility on the actual brand. So that's a big thing that people are trying to change, is make the brands responsible, which goes back to this idea of transparency, because if we know what they're responsible for, we can hold them to it, and knowing like where they produce. But thank you so much for participating in that one, everyone. We've got a few more, so.
All right, great. Why don't we, before we leave this topic, what you just said about transparency, I'll throw this in for a little bit of a discussion here, because the way a lot of brands, as well-intentioned as they are, will insert a trading company in between themselves and the contractor for further insulation from liabilities. And in terms of, oh, we didn't have direct contact with that factory. Maybe share a little perspective on this, because what this allows is for compartmentalizing some of the liabilities and risks that are associated by working with contract factories where there's local government affiliation, and thus questions like this coming up. Can maybe share a little thought on that in terms of the layers that get added in to segregate the liability elements.
Sure. And my first thought is that a lot of the brands, or not a lot, some of the brands that the labels were found at Rana Plaza had specifically had Rana Plaza on their no work list. Like, we will not contract them. But what happens in the fashion industry is, let's say you have an order out for 1 million t-shirts, and you're like, we're going to our partner factory, we need 1 million shirts. And they're like, yes, we can do it. But they really can only do 500,000. So then they subcontract out another factory, which then that brand doesn't know about. So that's the issue. Like, as you said, perhaps they insert these trading companies or middle management or whatever, to insulate themselves. But also, it does also happen without them really knowing, which is why it's so messed up. It's so opaque, which is why we're trying to push for more transparency.
Yeah, and I can say we usually don't mention too many brands, but there are brands that we'll talk about a little bit more that are trying to make improvements. So we'll touch on that with a little bit more visuals and more resources to go back to.
Mhm. Mhm.
That
Great.
sounds great. That sounds great. Let's oh, please, let's move on to the next
Move
topic
on.
here, please.
So we also kind of wanted to touch on this idea of, made in USA, because most of the time that sometimes can be like a label that people use as like everything is safe, everything is compliant, no need to worry, it's made in the USA. However, that's not always the case, and we will get down to this. This first article here was pulled from the LA Times from 2017, where they continue to discover a lot of very unsavory sweatshop conditions in Los Angeles, in the garment districts there. And a lot of these things we don't think can actually happen. There are laws in place for, minimum wages and for safe working conditions, but unfortunately, a lot of the workers in LA's garment district are undocumented and therefore, are not given the same rights. And this article itself, talks about how a lot of these workers aren't even being paid $5 an hour. They're not being paid, their overtime. And an incredible organization that Fashion Revolution works with from time to time is Garment Worker Center. And that is all they are doing. They are pushing to not only implement new laws, which there's one on the books. I think it's called SB 1399, which we've been trying to help support and advocate for. That is up for another vote within the legislation next year. Kathleen?
Yeah, they're looking at it has to be renamed. So right now you can look up articles through, and I'll put it in the chat room, through the Garment Workers Center, but SB 1399 is what it's called right now, but then it will be renamed in the spring and re-voted on.
Mm-hmm. And the issue is, like, yes, we have very stringent like labor rights laws. However, they're not always being enforced, and that's why things like this can happen. And also, this points to a lot of the issues where I believe this article was about mostly Forever 21, and how they are legally called a retailer, where this law that does protect, that's already in place, is for manufacturers. So brands are insulated from that law, because like, we are not manufacturing this, someone else is. So it's the factory owners, it's their liability to make sure that they are paying their workers. Those are not our workers. So there's all these, loopholes that happen. And so another example, and obviously this is not the USA, but kind of using this idea of made in developed nations is always supposed to be better. Well, during COVID, and hopefully you guys heard about this, Boohoo was found to have sweatshop conditions, underpaying wages, not paying wages in Leicester and in England, which you can see on the bottom right, that red dot. So not very far from London. So this undercover reporter actually got hired and worked for these companies, and he found so many different cases of these abuses happening. And in most instances, he was saying the garment workers there, which are also mostly immigrants, were being paid around £3.50, I think it's cents that they say as well, an hour, when the UK's minimum wage is actually £8.72 per hour. So these things are happening right in our doorstep and in our backyards too. And it just shows the case that, yes, like manufacturing jobs that have moved overseas, are doing this for labor costs, because that is always the highest cost when producing most textile and apparel, and especially when we're talking about fast fashion. But these labor issues are still happening. And that's really the point that we wanted to drive home on this.
And I think I also want to point out, Shannon, that so some of these places have unions. They have ways that the public says, hey, why doesn't that garment worker go work for the union? Well, in those cases, some of those garment manufacturers won't hire them because they're part of a union. So then that person has to say, do I put food on my table for my family by not being unionized and working for this despicable amount of money, but I get to have some money, or do I join a union and feel safer but not have any money because I'm not working? So
Mhm.
it's a real, it's a such a tension and struggle.
Absolutely, like union busting. That's what happens a lot in LA. It's been happening a lot in Bangladesh, and it's been happening a lot since COVID. And something else I wanted to kind of touch on is, during our lockdown, and obviously the first parts of it, things have opened up a bit. Most smarter brands pivoted and started making PPE and masks. And now pretty much everyone does that to keep, manufacturing open, which was, you could argue was good for garment workers. They had some jobs, not fully staffed, but in the instance in LA and some things that Garment Worker Center uncovered is like these people that are working in these awful conditions, they're not socially distanced. There's probably not fresh air coming in, and they weren't even provided with PPE. So this was a big instance of spreading the virus. So things kind of have gotten way worse during lockdown.
Yeah, Shannon, I remember that on Garment Workers Center, because it went even to the fact that the manufacturer had laid off all of the employees, but then handpicked a couple to work, under what is it called, under the table,
Mhm.
and handpicked those to work under the table, and those were the ones that were more aligned with that manager than others. So there was yeah, a kind of a hierarchy structure in hiring.
Yeah. And then did we talk about the pay up? You kind of touched on, about brands, canceling orders, and then just not paying for the materials and the labor and sometimes things that have already taken place. Remake, which is another nonprofit organization that we work with quite a bit, started a campaign called #PayUp to kind of publicly shame a lot of these brands to paying for things that were already produced in a lot of these countries.
Yeah, and I'll put that in the chat too.
That too, perfect. So as we talk about, all of these issues, I think it's extremely important to understand that everything overlaps. There is no industry, there is no job, there is nothing that exists in a siloed, space. Everything overlaps with each other. Once we start to kind of change our mindset to thinking about systematic changes and interconnectedness, then we're not going to be able to solve one issue unless we solve, multiple issues at the same time. And this idea of intersectionality, which, is not a new idea by any means, but there's a newer term that people are starting to use more called intersectional environmentalism, which is, I'm pretty sure it's Leah Thomas, who is the founder of, it's a nonprofit, or it's an organization called Intersectional Environmentalism. And she's also known on Instagram as the hashtag, her handle is Green Girl Leah. So this is this idea that social justice plus sustainability, that equals intersectional environmentalism. And as you can see from some of these stats here, that people of color are more adversely affected by, the outcomes of climate change, pollution, more so than people who are not of color. And I think one of these statistics here is like people of color are 2 times more likely to live without drinkable water. And they are, in a lot of cases, live closer to these areas of pollution. So just understanding that as we work in any system, and specifically with the fashion industry, understanding how everything works together. And if we are not providing social justice alongside environmental justice, then no real change can kind of come about.
So on this topic for Shannon, for you and for Kathleen, I mean, this is a really, I think, an important point to share with everybody here, because what you're talking about are things that are not necessarily apparel industry related. What you're talking about on this particular slide has to do with local regulations on zoning. Where can these facilities be built, right? So if we just talk about it in the context of the US, you're talking about local government, city, county government, zoning regulations, which dictates where light manufacturing or even some, of the more industrial businesses can be located. And that ties in with what I'll say is the imbalance of power, economic power, in terms of nobody wants to have a manufacturing facility that puts out heavy pollution in their residential neighborhood, the whole not in my backyard kind of a theory here. So, this overlap and the social impact, are there other areas that you see this in terms of just beyond just the worker? Like you said, the call it the environmental racism aspect of it. There's a financial aspect of this. Are there other elements that you may want to touch on with that intersectionality?
I mean, are you talking more about like socioeconomic and how?
Yeah, or any of the any other elements that come into this, where trying to let's say level set the apparel industry, touches all of these other areas. What are some thoughts on potentially ways to help offset what's happening here or correct course on the environmental racism, if you will?
Well, yeah, and I think that's something that, if 2020 has taught us anything, they've kind of brought a lot of these issues to light, which is a positive in that. And I think how we discuss it with Fashion Revolution, making sure that people of color have a voice in everything, and we are supporting voices of every color. And this comes down to, I mean, we can have clean manufacturing that is not hurting all these different communities, but making sure that people are in brands and are thinking more about stakeholders in general instead of just shareholders. Because when you include everyone in what gives your company value, then you are returning that value. Anything else, Kathleen, you kind of want to?
No, I could go on for this conversation because I think that it also starts with, like how is academia set? How is tuition so high in art and design schools that choke out the diversity of it? And how do we get it so that we're working in a more equalized education platform to then bring everybody, every color into these higher positions within apparel, which also can be change this face of how we're working with manufacturing and these decisions with state and local, all of it. So I think that, it's kind of like we have so many entities to work from. And of course, I'm speaking from my professional experience, is that academia needs to be better at providing more resources for every student of every color and having that across the board. And I think that, for me, that's where I'm coming from, is how do we get more of that type of energy and type of insight and type of awareness, so we're not having to talk about intersectional environment. So it goes away. We want it to go away, but it's all the roots of it have to be refertilized in a very equitable way. It can't be this anymore.
So important.
That leads me to a trivia question.
Okay.
Perfect.
Okay. So, according to the New York Times article in December 2018, is the fashion industry really the second most polluting industry in the world? No, it's number one if you look closely at the complexity of its supply chains. B, yes, everyone who says otherwise probably works for the fashion industry. Or C, no, there is a lack of reliable factual evidence to support this claim.
Audience, have any ideas? Putting it in the chat. A, B, or C? Okay.
We got an A. So
A. Okay. Let's see.
So far majority is no, it's number one if you look closely at the complexity of its supply chains. Jim, do you have an inkling here?
Oh, I know for sure it's the most polluting. So that's not.
Well,
I just gave that one away, right?
Well, there would be some people that would argue with you, because actually the answer is C. There is a wonderful journalist named Alden Wicker who is kind of really leading one of the fronts of kind of dispelling this myth that it is number two, because there is a lack of really good data in the fashion industry. And yes, I mean, it could be if we could actually trace everything, but that is very, very hard. And I think she puts it as maybe somewhere between 5 to 8, being was one of the top polluters. And I believe, like, you know, fossil fuel industry is number one, and I believe agriculture is number 2, or animal agriculture, if we're talking specifically. But this is a very hard question, and I think this fact actually comes from, I believe it was Linda Greer, and she said something in, I don't know, it was 2015, but she was speaking about the fashion industry being the second biggest polluter in Bangladesh, I believe is where this statistic actually comes from. There's a wonderful article on Vox that was published in January of 2019 by Alden, and she interviews Linda, and she's like, I think I'm at fault for making this like a well-known fact, but it's not. It's hard to tell.
So I mean, so the so joking aside here, you know, but whether it's the method of measuring and building some metrics around this, again, to me, and this is the serious part of it, is the transparency aspect of it. You know, in terms of, if we were to look through the entire supply chain in terms of going back to where do the fibers that make up the yarns for the fabric, how do they originate? You know, what's the impact? You know, whether it's cotton, whether it's the polyesters or nylons, whether it's wools, you know, no matter what category it comes from, if we start tracing it all the way back to source of material origin, and then through fabrics, and then through the cut and sew garment production aspect of it, and then the transportation, where you're having material hauled around the world, literally around the world, and then to the way inventory is managed, so that there's always overproduction, so that you don't miss out on having certain colors or sizes. You know, though, so we can go on and on about that. But the point that I think you're trying to make here is, depending on who is speaking, there's still a effort to manage the data, so that they're not the one that's at the bullseye of, you know, all of these issues that we're talking about. So
Right.
Everybody has a different set of data that helps to make them look a little more favorable in light of all of this. But hey, so let's. I think this is a great topic, and I think we may come back to this later in terms of part of our question series in terms of how our clothes are made. But let's go ahead and shift over to the design topic, because I know that a lot of our audience members specifically have an interest in this, as that's their area of focus.
Yeah, thank you, Jim. And I'm going to talk a little bit, you know, because again, I'm an educator. I taught at many schools for many years about sustainability in apparel and footwear, and even automotive design. But the design aspect of it, it comes from the root of how the curriculum and the didactic of the program is truly set out. And to build a fashion program, or any program in which you're making something, you're putting something onto this earth that wasn't there before, there has to be a very strong shift in looking at every aspect and questioning its viability, whether we need it or not, and to teach students how to do that. So when this is a picture of one of my students working through this process of developing her senior collection. And the idea of understanding, you know, they've gone through where the fibers come from, what happens to the fibers once it goes through this yarn spinning. And then it's almost that they have more value to all these materials, that even though the school provides to them, they take ownership of it, and they design in a more mindful set. And I think that was really important approach. The second approach is to bring students to factories, and the design component is, you know, this beautiful fabulous cloud that people perceive as what designers do. but design needs to understand how what they create is manufactured. So pre-COVID, we would take students on experiential journeys into factories. And I've gone through factories all over the world to understand processes. And if you understand how things are made, and that there is a person sitting behind a sewing machine making that little line seam that you drew in a black and white sketch, you give a little bit more ownership to every seam that you put in a garment or any material, or where's the material sourced from. So having the experiential moments allows the student also to have their own aha moments, to have their own understanding as far as what their passion of fashion industry is. So I think it's really important to go out and see things. This is also an example of bringing the students to the farm. And this was a tough day because, the students worked on the farm all day, but while we were there, one of the sheep was having a miscarriage. And the students got to see the farmer on how much the farmer has to work with to keep these sheep, her livestock healthy and safe. And some of the students did stay and watch, but the process it's enormous. It's not just shearing a sheep and then feeding it some hay in the morning. It's the full understanding of what goes into creating yarn and creating this fiber. So I think understanding those deeper impacts also creates a stronger designer. And the last point is research, understanding, what happened before. Was it done in an inefficient way? How can it be improved? Understanding that every product, again, has to be refined, and most likely it's been done before. So how do you go back and measure it so when it's reproduced, it makes a less environmental impact on this earth? So I think those are the 3 points of design that I really want to hit on. And it does lead into our next trivia question.
All right.
So Shannon, I'll let you carry this
Sure.
one.
You want to go to the next slide? I can't remember the question off the top of my head.
Sorry.
No problem. Oh, this is a good one. So in October 2018, fashion blogger known as Brian Boy posted a tweet saying, "I'm going to jump off a bridge head first if I hear about yet another sustainable clothing line. There's nothing sustainable about creating something new en masse. Just stop, please. You want to know what's sustainable? ... So what do you think his answer was? Was it A, what's sustainable? Making your own damn clothes. That's it. Adios. Was it B, wearing your old damn clothes? That's what. Bye. Or is it C, nudity? Hell yeah. Ciao. What do you guys think Brian Boy said? Let's see. It looks like we have a chat. So we're thinking it nudity. We have a C. We have a couple of C's. Kathleen, do you want to tell them what the answer is?
Yeah, no. So, and I love, yeah, right, Britta. I love the nudity part because it does emphasize that we wear clothes. We're part of the system. No matter if you think you're not or not, you're part of the system unless you're nude. So it is B, wear your old damn clothes. That's what, bye.
Yes, the most sustainable closet or the most sustainable wardrobe is what's already in your closet. That's why we talk a lot about, circular economy, re-wearing, reselling, like how incredible ThredUp and the Real have grown over the past few years, just keeping things in the system and out of the landfill.
So that's a good segue, Shannon, because now we're going to lead into action. And those are excellent action items. But there's some ways that students and brands and citizens can benefit from all of the work that we've done at Fashion Revolution and beyond. And the first is that if you are a student and you're interested in being a part of our student ambassador program, we welcome you to email us at fashrevUSA.studentambassadors@gmail.com. And our student ambassador coordinators will onboard you and bring more information that you've ever thought you ever needed to host events, to host swaps, to be a part of the global student ambassadors. We have student ambassadors in almost every country. And I think these numbers are much higher now, but with COVID happening, we can make more connections with other student ambassadors in other countries for whatever research a student is doing. And when I say students, I mean anyone from any age. You know, if you're part of a middle school, high school, university, postgraduate, if you're an emerging designer, that's our student ambassador program. But if you're not in that realm, then we also have programs for brands. And you know, brands have it pretty tough, especially if they're an established brand and now they have to pivot into this new practice of sustainability. So we want to encourage brands to hire sustainability experts. We don't think that you know it all, but you do know enough to know when you need to get support. And so interns are begging to be part of brands to help with this research. And there's also many, many consultants that are established consultants for, you know, sustainability expertise, and also the risk mitigation.
Yeah, you want to go to the next slide? I think we're stuck on the student ambassador one, but right, as Kathleen was saying, like there's lots of recommendations that we can make to brands. I think we probably will go into this next, but one of these ideas that we wanted to kind of touch on is understanding what COVID did to the global supply chain and how much disruption it caused. Implementing sustainable practices and transparency and, you know, stricter labor rights laws and stricter environmental you know, regulations in your company is not just a good look. It helps reduce your risk. When you know your supply chain and you know that, you know, there is a global pandemic on its way from somewhere, you know, an overseas factory, you can be like, okay, like let's deal with this. But this is something that ties into just good business. Like there are people called risk managers or risk analysts. Like that is all they do is analyze what kind of risk a company is open to. So that is something that we want brands to also think about. There's also this, you know, movement and the finance community that is looking at ESG, which is environmental, social, and governance, you know, issues within companies. And financial people and, you know, investors are looking at companies, and ESG, the market has been growing so much over the past decade. So finance people who are going to invest are also looking at your ESG, understanding what your risk is as a brand. So implementing sustainability things are not just for, you know, whipped cream on top. This is good business. So we just really wanted to kind of drive that fact home. And of course, participate in Fashion Revolution's Transparency Index, which is put out every year. This is a great exercise also for brands to understand, to get to know their supply chain more so. It's open to the 200 biggest fashion brands, which is not changing next year. We're looking at the biggest ones because they have the most impact and the most potential for impact. Kathleen, if you wanted to kind of give a little bit more about what the index is and what it isn't.
Yeah, so I kind of previewed this a little bit before when we talked about brands and how we want to know the brands that are making the effort. Mm-hmm. And that's what the Fashion Transparency Index does. It shows the brands that are making the effort. If you want to look at resources that actually label brands as sustainable or achieving sustainability, you can look at an app called Good On You. Mm-hmm. That, you know, you can go while you're shopping or perusing internet to figure out what you need to buy, and then you can look at Good On You to see how it rates on that. So it's two separate entities for understanding the rating system. So this Fashion Transparency Index is incredible in that the efforts of these companies are recognized, and I think that is something that a lot of places don't do. So the Higg Index is another one. The Federal Trade Commission's Green Guide is another one. So there's all these different opportunities to whatever you're sourcing or whatever you need to learn about a company, you can look at these reportings to make the best decision. Mm-hmm. And I think brands are trying hard. They are trying to encompass all of the people that are working for them. And we're encouraging them to show who made the clothes. So it's part of the process, and it's also part of the responsibility, that brands must protect our workers who make our clothes. We want to know who they are, which also leads to citizens and what they can do. And it's as simple as posting hashtag who made my clothes or what's in my clothes. And these are important social media practices that we're putting in place with Fashion Revolution. Something as like taking a picture and showing your label and asking the brand who made my clothes. And that initiates a conversation about where these clothes come from. On our website, there's a ready-made template that you can mail to a policymaker asking for more transparency information. And there's a lot of more material on the website, but this is one example of a 10-minute process to send a letter, get a response, and take a picture of that response and post that. So our social media channels are enormous, again, global, and we welcome your efforts in this too.
And a lot of conversations that we have with brands are telling us that it's the consumer. The consumer is asking for this. The consumer is pushing for this. So the more noise we make, the more change that we can possibly implement. So be loud, use your voice.
So this is just, and some people say this needs to be turned upside down, but either way, this is a hierarchy of needs, and it's just an idea of your thought process, and as Shannon said, what's in your closet is the most sustainable aspect of what you wear. So use what you have, repair it, take care of it. And then if you have to borrow or swap or thrift and make, and then the last tier is to buy. And it's just a mindset. So here I think this is our last trivia question. And we're asking the audience, what action will you take? So will you thrift, rent, swap, repair? Will you write your policymaker, support SB 1399 or however it's renamed? Will you upload Fashion Revolution resources to share on social media? Will you hire a sustainability consultant or intern? Will you ask a brand who made my clothes and or what's in my clothes? And F, all of the above. So we're hoping you choose F, but yeah.
You can only do one thing at a time.
Yeah.
We should probably also add on to that, talking about this. If you are a bit educated or aware of the social environmental issues in the fashion industry, tell your friends. Say, I don't support this way of consuming anymore. Or did you know that as much water as it takes to make that one pair of jeans is how much someone drinks in 3 years? Tell people, spread the word.
And this is just the aspect of showing people who made your clothes, bringing transparency in. So with that, here is our contact information. Shannon and myself, you can email us directly. You can also email from fashionrevolution.org site. And you can also see all the countries that are participants of Fashion Revolution. We do have a bonus trivia. Should we do the bonus trivia?
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay, here it is. So Shannon, I'll let you take this away.
Okay, so this is a hard one. So according to the Associated Press, who makes sportswear worn by U.S. college sports teams in the internment camps in the Xinjiang region of China? Sorry, I butchered that. So I don't know if you are aware of this region in China, but hopefully you are. And if you're not, this is educating you a bit. So the people that are making these clothes in these internment camps are either A, Uyghurs, Kazakhs, and others, mostly Muslims, detained to eliminate poverty and bring minorities into a modernized world, Is it B, criminals, smugglers, and vagrants captured at checkpoints on the Pakistan and Afghanistan borders and detained to re-educate them in modern values? Or is it C, local college students imprisoned for espousing the Marxist values they were taught in school by supporting protests for workers' rights in the region's factories?
It's a tough one.
Anybody have an idea of, oh boy, exactly. Not a lighthearted one, but something I think is interesting for people to know. Yes, Ellie, it is A. So you are caught up on this, and I think it's something that has been getting a decent amount of media attention. But we've known about these areas for a couple of years, I think, due to satellite photos that they took over there. But one issue that has been in discussion in some trade and industry publications is now a lot of auditors are saying they will not go to factories in those areas, which you get, okay, we're not supporting this, but then there's no way to see what's happening on the ground. So it presents these two really bad solutions, kind of. And Jim's shaking his head, so I feel like you might have a little more to say about that. I'm turning this around.
Well, I want to support what you're saying, because this particular topic in the Xinjiang region has to do with combination of government policy and where it overlaps. So this comes back to that whole intersectionality in terms of what is government policy, local customs and religion, yeah, and social norms in that area. And how does that I guess conflict or that difference come into play?
Mhm.
So in this particular region, when you have that sort of a difference, the government implements a educational program. That's what it's called, by the way.
Okay.
These camps are called education centers. And so what ends up happening there is that if you disagree with me, we're going to provide you education that helps you see, the right way to think. And so when you have that sort of let's call it incentive to, call it incentive to learn, right? That's how it's presented. It creates a problem because the auditors bought into this in terms of saying that, hey, this region has organic cotton. So this is where one element of the things that we're talking about, where, oh, we're talking about organic cotton, which is a dominant material in the area, that has, oh, well, we're doing the right things, so we're going to overlook these other things. So now all of that is coming to light because of some of these investigative reporting. So ton of information that's recently been published through reputable sources, and we'll have more of that type of resource available on Inside Fashion Design, not only about Fashion Revolution, but also about some of the topics that we're touching on and where to look for some of these resources. And we really want to encourage everybody that's here and listening to the recordings to check out the Fashion Revolution site for a lot of this information and resource.
Great. Thank you. Thank you, Britta. Thank you, Jim. This has been a pleasure for us to be here. We appreciate this time and also just having this conversation. I think it's been enormously insightful and exciting, and thank you so much.
Thank you. The time always goes too fast.
I know, I just realized we ran. We apologize to you, Jim. Kathleen and I are used to being the moderators.
No, this has been perfect. This has been perfect. I mean, everything that you said is so relevant to our industry right now in terms of, the whole idea behind a, multi-billion-dollar industry, where at the other end of the spectrum, you've got people that are working for pennies. So the disparity that takes place along that process is really, what I think you're trying to address here and bring light to. And I think that is very much a worthy cause for everyone to be aware of in our industry. So, this has been very much a important topic that we want to make sure that all of our audience over the past 3 days has access to this type of resource and information. So we want to promote that as much as we can.
Thank you.
Well,
It's been
thank
so
you.
great to have you both. And, with this, we will wrap up our session for today, and stick around for the happy hour with Britta and the others from
Woohoo!
Inside Fashion Design.
We're ready.
So, all right.
Thank you, everyone. Thanks for coming.
Thanks, guys. Bye.
Bye. Thank you.
Bye.